Okay, so good afternoon to you, Dr. Steve Porges. It is my honor to be talking with you today about Theraplay and social engagement system and the effect of the phenomenon of the COVID-19 era of social distancing and having to be apart from our loved ones, having the stress at home of being quarantined, and what it means to have social connection in the era of physical distancing. Okay, so from what we're going to do is from my perspective, I'm going to tell you about some work that I've been doing with families that I typically see in person, but the circumstances have made it so that I'm not able to see them in person, but we've been trying to do similar work online and with the goal of facilitating connection between the parent and child, typically families that have been traumatized, but who are particularly stressed right now because of the quarantine situation. And just helping them to remain connected, to remain regulated, and to find that calm space between them during this time. And also just to keep connected between myself and the family. So those are my goals, and I'll be showing some videos. And I was really interested in speaking to you because this entire experience is an exercise in bridging our polyvagal systems and translating our social engagement system online. So would you like to say a little bit about what you've been experiencing?
Well, we're all humans, and we evolved as a very connected species. And the most important thing about that connection is how we have historically used our relationships to regulate our feelings of threat or feelings of discomfort. And we're in what I would call a very paradoxical situation where we're under threat, which is the virus. It's a real threat, but the way of mitigating the threat is to be socially isolated, which means we've taken away the primary tool that our nervous system has used from our evolutionary history to regulate our state. So we're in a very complex, paradoxical situation. And what I was sharing with you before we started the recording was that I wrote a paper for a journal called Clinical Neuropsychiatry. And the title of the paper is "The COVID Pandemic is a Paradoxical Challenge to Our Nervous System, a Polyvagal Perspective." And basically it goes through these issues of what are we left with to connect, to mitigate that. And we're left with basically video conferencing, which is really the theme of what you want to discuss today. But what I was also saying before we went, quote, live or recording, was that we've gone through decades of learning not to be connected to images that we see on a two-dimensional screen. So our nervous system, when we see something in two dimensions, says, I can do something else. I can think about something else. I can read a paper. I can have my cup of coffee. It's not going to have any difference. However, if I'm sitting across from you at a Starbucks and we're having a cup of coffee together, I'm intuitively picking up all your cues, all your gestures of social engagement, because we are now in an interactive dyad. But when we put you on the video, it's a different experience. It's a two-dimensional one. And since, television was really where we started to get really dissociated from the human image as it moved across the screen or even talked to us. So this is basically, television became part of American culture in the early 1950s. So we now have generations of people talking, eating, doing all kinds of other things while other people are literally presenting on the two-dimensional screen. Mm-hmm. And I am reminded about when I was a little boy. I'll give you the year even. It was either 1949 or 1950. It's a long, long time ago. So to put it in perspective, I was born in 45. So I was a 5-year-old. And my father was putting together our first television set. It was a kit. And he was assembling it in the living room. And then when he finally got it ready to turn on, the antenna was filling up the living room, this big antenna. And what he was saying to me was he was very concerned about television because he felt people would develop bad habits. They would talk when other people were talking. So I am reminded of this experience because he was really telling the future, because we've learned not to take the image of another person. We see violence, we see people being injured, uh, and we don't feel it. We just let it go through because we use the two-dimensional screen as entertainment or in education. But now we have to use it for social connectedness, a real connectedness. And now I'll give you another personal perspective. I don't normally wear glasses. These are reading glasses that I use at the computer. But when I put them on, I can see your face better. I can see the cues from the upper part of your face. So even though my camera is not in the right place to make good eye contact, I can see your face and I can detect your feelings more intuitively. So I'm on my own journey of relearning of how to socially interact using video conferencing by being more attentive and basically more aware, because we don't want to be over attentive, because if we're over attentive, we lose our spontaneity. And so I want to be, in a sense, have my nervous system more aware that you are another human being that is responding in time with me. So we want to look at the synchrony and the reciprocity of our interactions.
Wow, very cool. That's you know, first of all, your dad was really prescient in his concerns, and they really have come to pass. The mention of your glasses making it possible for you to see my facial expressions and nuances is really, really important, because there's actually a real art to being able to communicate well on video, which could also mean like where you're looking, because you mentioned that you're not looking into the camera directly.
Well, I'm looking at you, but the
Mhm,
camera is there. Now, what I had been doing was
mhm.
actually, put it up here. This is a little tripod or stand, and I was moving the camera to be at eye length, but it would cover the screen. And in covering the screen, I was losing contact. So I was maintaining contact with the camera, but losing contact with the person. And so right now, I'm just kind of like, you know, I'm trying to get you to fill in the gap and think that I'm looking at you. Um,
Yeah,
and over time, we'll feel, because the voice of our voices will be more melodic and more reassuring and more connected. And it won't be a tutorial. It will be more of an interaction. And that's part of what we have to learn. I'm waiting for computer monitors to put the camera, embed the camera in the screen,
that's
so
exactly
that
right.
this interaction feels more real.
That's exactly what I was going to say, is the ability to look somebody in the
Mm,
eye really
mhm.
has a lot to do with that inner subjectivity. So it's going to evolve very quickly, because technology will follow the need of,
Well, the technology is there. It just
Mhm,
hasn't been articulated as a product.
mhm,
So I have a 27-inch iMac. It's a computer, but the computer is built into the screen. But a 27-inch screen is big. If I
mhm.
were at a laptop, it would work much better.
Got it.
But
Got it.
but I like seeing you lifelike, or almost lifelike. So we're dealing with this trade-off of the features.
That's right. That's right. And what you mentioned is if we don't have the exact capacity to do that gazing,
Mhm.
because of the fact that we're not necessarily looking, like right now I'm looking into the camera and I can't see your face, but I'm being very purposeful about looking to the camera in order to make you really feel like
Yeah.
I'm looking at you. However, I have to imagine it or see you in the periphery in order to do that. um, but to compensate, one has to do more with voice prosody or with gestures or
Mhm.
moving back and forth and into the camera in order to compensate for
Mhm.
the other variations or deficiencies.
Yeah.
And I don't know if we've all had about 10 weeks to to test out this experience, and where do you, how satisfying do you find your online relationships these days
Okay.
with people who you care about and who,
Well, there are two dimensions there. So there are people that, in the sense that you're bonded to, you care about your family, but there's also the expectation of this larger world where you have to schedule talks or workshops that were canceled and now have been reconstructed and reformatted to be online experiences.
Mhm.
And now the challenge was, how do you make the online experience have some of the features of a real life experience where there was a lot of bonding and interaction? So like when I went to your meeting, it was just a beautiful meeting. It was such wonderful energy and people were so open, accessible, and friendly. And it was like a feeling of belonging. And it was conveyed to, everyone felt that way. It was this total immersing into a Theraplay environment. So people were living Theraplay, but if they live Theraplay, they're also living polyvagal principles. They're co-regulating, they're interacting, they're becoming accessible, and they're supporting each other. They're doing all the right things.
Yeah.
So when you give talks or go to meetings, you want to convey some of those same features. When
Yeah.
in my talks or in my workshops, and especially the breaks in workshops where you get a chance to be bombarded with questions, but it's really not, you're connecting. So it's that moment where people come because they just want to meet you. They might want to hug. They just might want to say a couple words for self-validation. But it's a moment that can be transformative for them, and therefore it's also transformative for me. So it becomes this level of connectedness. That's stripped from my life. And so my calendar, which was very heavily scheduled for travel, a lot of it international,
Mhm.
suddenly becomes open. But it didn't mean that my time was now free. My time has been much more, I would say the demands on it are greater, because now I had to construct workshops in a different modality or different strategy. So I had to create materials that were lectures, which are really PowerPoint presentations, to a blank screen, which to me is like, I would call it on the range of torture, because I want the feedback. My body craves it and I look for it, and that was taken away. So in its place, what I did was have more interviews before the tutorial or the lecture material, more Q&A, but basically it became more time demanding
Okay.
as opposed to less. I didn't travel. But when I travel, all I do is that workshop and those people. So there was a container for the interactions. But if you do things at home, there's no container. There's always something else. And so
That's
I
true.
would say I am a novice, and we all are novices in this, in trying to maintain and even allow connectedness to occur through this two-dimensional modality. And I'm working on it. I can't say that I've perfected it, but I can say
Mhm.
that I'm making it better than I would do it if I were, in a sense, not taking it as this portal of connection.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. And some of us, I think, have more overt and on the surface social engagement
Mhm.
faculties,
Yeah.
and some less, and some translate better onto Zoom
Yeah.
and onto the digital. And so those who may not be as what animated or whatever the aspects are, we all kind of have to be very consciously building those skills.
It's almost a paradox of what you're mentioning, because if you're too conscious, you become
Mm,
too self-evaluative. If
okay.
you become too self-evaluative, you shift physiological state and you lose all the attributes that you want, which is
Okay.
spontaneity, accessibility,
Mm,
because you're trying to present. So it's the difference. If you think about people in different phases of their careers, in the
mm,
early part of their careers, if they're academics, they're very anxious about giving a talk. And then as they get older, they accept a different perspective and they now say, okay, I'm privileged now to pontificate, in a sense, be accessible, to let people know who I am and
nice.
not merely the data.
Nice. Nice. Yes. Right. Yeah. The more relaxed you are, and the more accessible you are, the much
The,
more.
the, for me,
Mhm.
continuity is that the theory is all about that. So I can be so the differentiation between what I'm trying to do in the talk and the theory becomes very, very small. So I'm trying to, in a sense, be the expression of the theoretical principles. I wouldn't say I'm trying. I would say that's who I would like to be, and that's where I'm moving. So if I am, in a sense, accessible, then whatever I say is people can basically understand it and accept it. But if I am, in a sense, if I pontificate information, and I, in a sense, as you know, the movement of the nose is really a wonderful thing, because it's like used to be called snob, where people look up as opposed to looking to you. And it's interesting on that, because Obama, who appears to be a really wonderful person, was being criticized because he would, at the end of phrases, look up. And people would react to him as if he was aloof, and he wasn't one of them. He wasn't connecting. And Bill Clinton, did the opposite. He would look down and into you. And they would say, it doesn't matter what he says, I'm with him. And so the issue is, are the gestures that we're using are either keeping those portals open, or they're closing it. And if they close it, we'll rewrite the narrative. We'll say, he's a snob, or we'll say he's accepting. You follow what I'm saying?
I sure.
So in the world that you're in, or Theraplay is in, Theraplay invites speakers, many of them with academic backgrounds. And so you have experience in your own professional career, the range of how people relate to you. Right?
Yes, we certainly have. Somehow or other, though, I don't think by coincidence, the people who we have chosen to come have had that that presence, that openness, that authenticity, and I think it's no coincidence. You being one of them.
and I follow the whole string of my friends, so we know that there was basically handoffs. But if you go back through the history, if you go back through, let's say, a 30-year history where you were trying to get academics into your programs, I bet there was a learning curve.
Absolutely. I think that when, the top down versus bottom up, that there's a trend in history to prefer top down versus bottom up models. And I think that we got a little bit more appealing when the bottom up became sort of really sexy, for a better, for lack of a better word.
Well, what we learn is not just bottom up, it's the integration of bottom up and top down. It's this bidirectionality communication of the nervous system. And within polyvagal theory, we call them neural exercises. But within Theraplay, you have other words for the same things.
Absolutely. And that brings us, it's a great segue, an opportunity for me to show you a few activities, and I'm going to show them on video. You're familiar with the 4 dimensions of Theraplay, and that we organize ourselves around the 4 dimensions. And within the 4 dimensions, there's so many different varied, micro behaviors and things we can emphasize. And I tried to sort of put it into polyvagal perspectives, but I'm going to leave that to you. I will show you from my point of view what we did, and then you will tell me what strikes you, what you understand from it. So let me go ahead and see these neural exercises. I'm going to share my screen. And the first thing we're going to see, as I mentioned, I work with families that they certainly have challenges.
So the next game is
due to trauma, important trauma, interpersonal trauma, and this is a family that's no exception. And they're going to be playing a game that we call the mirror game.
Not with the balloon, so you can put the balloon aside. Okay, so the next game is a mirroring game, so it's a silent game. So one of you is pretending to look inside the mirror, and the other person acts exactly like the person. So you have to you have to face to face. So for example, Noam, you be a person looking inside the mirror and you look straight at your mom, and she's going to do all the same motions that you do as if you're literally looking into a mirror simultaneously. Okay?
Okay.
Without no words. Very nice. Wow. You are so good, you guys. It's like a real mirror. I want to see if Noam can now be Heather's mirror.
Okay.
So Heather's going to be the one who's looking in the mirror, and Noam, you do exactly what your mom is doing.
Next. I forget what next. You can play.
Wow, you two are so good at this.
Okay. So now I'm going to stop my screen share. And there you are. Okay. So from my point of view, I have a dyad that the child is needing a lot of the parent's energy for focus and for just feeling emotionally contained because of the different anxiety and things that this child feels. And so one of the things that I think is really powerful is their ability for first the mom to really, really key into what he's doing and make it so that she really tells him, I see you and I follow you. And then the other piece is that by her providing that for him, and then he's able to provide that for her, which is another issue, which is that it's hard for him to follow her. There's a lot of back and forth and control battles, for a better word, for lack of a better word. There's something underneath that. How would you see it?
Well, see, I would start from the principles that I live and die with, which are, first of all, you're getting reciprocity within real time, or synchrony. So you have the movements. And in Theraplay words, it might be reciprocal control or shared control of the experience, or something of that order. But so you have the movements, you have the sense of control, but you have something else going on, which I was starting to see as probably the most important thing, and that was the freeing up of the ventral side, meaning the person becomes accessible. So in our own world, if one wants to say accessible, they'll take their arms and they'll do this. If they want to say defensive, they'll do this. Now, if you replay those videos, what are a lot of the movements? The movements are defensive and then all this accessibility, which in a way is a neural exercise of saying, I can be accessible and I'm not going to be hurt. And what happens with that is you see the smiles. So the cues, rather than being threatened defensive cues, become part of a play cue. And so it's this part that I thought, and you can see it happening, of the sharing. Now, a critic of my comments might say, well, what else can they do to mirror? But it's interesting, the emphasis on, in a sense, showing the ventral side, or let's say making the ventral side available.
Yes, yes, very interesting. And let me one of the other things about the COVID-19 era is that your private life and your professional life become really, really merged, and you have complete lack of control.
Well, if you had a young child running across, and I've had these, I don't have a young child, but I've been in a lot of calls and interviews and stuff where there've been dogs and children. Now, the part is that in our home, we don't have any dogs anymore because they transitioned, and all we feel this, yes, we feel this great loss, both of us, for having a dog, which is a wonderful co-regulator, especially if you're a couple together and you both love your dog. So we had two. So it becomes this really kind of comfortable thing because our children are out of the house, and and that's the other part that's very, in a sense, I would say, so use the word hurtful, because by that sense it makes it almost like someone's doing something to you.
No,
but the issue is it hurts not being able to have my kids visit or come back in the house, or to see my granddaughter. And that is really, well, she's 2.5, and it was precious. We were on basically on something called Caribou, which is an app where you can read stories together and color together. So it's better than nothing.
yeah.
But we miss her a lot, and we miss our two sons.
Yeah, absolutely. This is really is so prominent. The theme of loss on a very experiential level, and that's why many people have gotten dogs during this era, which
think in terms of like older people who aren't healthy. It's one thing being older and healthy. It's another one being older and unhealthy, where your children and your relatives can't be there as support, because life's all about transition. Nothing is really bad. I mean, aging, illness, and death aren't bad in themselves, but it's all, how do we process them? How do we experience them? And we really want to experience them with a sense of dignity and a feeling of completion.
That's right.
And this makes it almost impossible. So for those of us who are, in a sense, that critical age, which is very vulnerable to the virus, we're, in a sense, saying we can wait. It's going to be a discomfort, but we really want the opportunities to embrace our kids, our friends, and our granddaughter.
Yeah. Wow, that's a really powerful moment there. Okay, so I'll show you a second video, and by sharing my screen.
You did well last time.
Thank you. That's very nice. Feels good to be supported.
Well, these are challenges for all of us.
It is. It's really challenging. Yeah. Because there's stress involved in doing several things at once and hoping that things work out. It's
the uncertainty. Our nervous system really detests uncertainty. That's danger to us. So
that's right.
That's the game that you bought.
Right. Right. Okay, so this game is called Slippery Slip. I think it's evident, it'll be self-evident what it brings. Let's just watch.
Okay, so you are going to be, you have to be sitting like against the wall, but also make sure you have something behind you that is soft enough. So maybe you could put a pillow, or maybe you could use those yoga mats, as long as they're soft. And then Eamon's going to sit in front of you, and if you sit in front of him, then you can do the lotion, like the slippery slip. Do you remember the game where you hold on to his arms and then you fall backwards?
You go this way.
So fold your legs, Noam, so that Ema can get close to you. And then Ema, you're going to put lotion on both of Noam's arms so that they're slippery. There you go. You know what you're doing. It's funny. It feels so good when somebody stretches you out like that.
All right, slippery now.
Okay, and then you're gonna hold on like at his elbows or even above, and you're gonna try to hold on, and you're gonna slip back. You're gonna go, oh, hold on, I'm trying to hold on, and then you fall backwards. You fall. Go. Can you go? Oh, where you go? So try and hold on, and I slip it away. Trying to hold on, and I slipped. And you try to go like even slower, so like you're like making it more dramatic. I'm trying to hold on. I can't hold on. I'm trying, but I can't.
Okay. Let me get out. Okay. So this is an engagement game that we do clearly for the proprioceptive input, but also for this, it's the same thing as kind of a peekaboo or hide and seek, where somebody is with you, and then there's that moment of uncertainty of, are they going to leave me and when? And will it be okay? Will it feel okay? And will they come back? And so it's that back and forth that is creating those kind of moments of meeting.
So you want to hear my interpretation?
Indeed, I do.
Okay, so we can start with yours, which is really one of the important ones, and that is what peekaboo is about. It's about something that would be frightening, and then it's repaired. And you have some of that element there, but you have another element, and that is the same element that if I were to ask you, stand up, close your eyes, and fall backwards. Okay, now let's put someone behind you. Let's say I'm behind you. Can you fall backwards into, do you have the sense of trust that I will take care of you? So in a sense, you're doing that at a minor level, and you have the wall behind the person. But in a way, if you think about what we're doing, or what this exercise is doing, is triggering the nervous system with a degree of uncertainty, but it's uncertainty within a container. It's a confined experience. I'll give you the metaphor of being on a roller coaster, or jumping out of a 10th story window. Which one would you do? Now, the sensory experience could be very similar, but the context is very, very different. In one, you have a cognitive framework of trust of the system, of the ride, but we find out that sometimes that expectancy is violated. So some people will never go on roller coasters, while others just crave that bit because they have sufficient trust in the mechanism, and they crave that experience. So when the little boy is falling backwards, he's falling backwards, but it becomes a game to him because he's not going to get hurt falling backwards, and he even develops the expectancy that he will fall backwards. So he's going through this neural exercise where he's expanding the experience of a body being in an uncertain gravitational field, literally. And that's providing him with a degree of trust in the world, trust in his mother, trust in the therapist.
Right, really important. The gravitational uncertainty, and trust. That's a real neural exercise.
Oh, yeah. When my wife, Sue, I'm not sure if you've met her.
Of course.
Yeah. So Sue and I were giving a talk once in Michigan, and we were both on the stage together, and I said to her, fall backwards. And she fell backwards. I said, this is really the goal of relationships and of civilization. This is what it's about. It's being able, in a sense, to trust someone under these uncertain situations.
And wow, I would have liked to have been there in Michigan. As far as one thing that I kind of want to bring out is that my presence there is attempting to somehow modulate or amplify the experience by, when I'm saying that I want you to, can you take it slower? Can you do it slower so that she can kind of pull and go backwards? I say, you're trying to hold on, trying to hold on. we were, working on trying to get that synchronized between the mom and myself. But the point of that is that that's an intervention to try to help with something that may not be going. It's like I'm with the mom attempting to extend an activity in order to bring out the maximum pleasure from it.
Well, I would translate it slightly. You're expanding the duration of it so that the sensory experiences now you have ample time to develop different narrative. So if it were really quickly, the narrative may miss the major points of the experience. So slowing up the falling backwards or the movement of it enables a very complex narrative to be developed. Like my mom was really trying to hold me and I was able to get away. And it's not that she didn't do her job. I was able to get away. So you can create different narratives that are both, empowering to the child without, in a sense, being injurious to the mother in her needs to be supportive.
Okay. That's a very that's a profound interpretation. Very interesting what you're reading into it.
Slowing things up enable us to, in a sense, re-experience our experiences. We re-experience it, but as we experience these events or feelings, we create our narrative. We create a story about what it really means to us.
Okay.
And the slower we do it, the more creative our narrative can become.
Right.
And that's where the therapist can help the direction of the narrative. So the positive attributes, the emotional positivity that's being done in that event enables the narrative to be very, very positive. If you shift it to, ooh, you're going to get hurt, you're going to fall back, the narrative would be totally different. And the child would start embellishing that my mom didn't take care of me. And that's it's always been her problem. She's always never taken care of me.
Right. That's right. And bringing it to our the experience of reciprocity online through the digital format, I would like to see if you and I could play a game that has that reciprocity and that back and forth, despite the fact that we're on different sides of the screen.
Well, I have to get prepared for that.
Well, it does mean that we need a little bit of movement, because the game, we can't do push me over with hands, but we can do a game called blow me over, which means that what I'm going to do is I'm going to blow at you. I'm going to count to 3 and I'm going to give it my biggest blow. And I want to see if you can feel it and if it moves you back on the other side.
Okay. I'm here accessible to be blown over.
Wow. Okay. So you're ready. Okay. 1, 2, and 3. And then I'm going to see if I can pull you back up and get closer and closer and closer. And there you are. Yeah.
So you can feel it on your chest because your expectancy of being blown over and the movement. You see, you're working also with, so this is virtual, but as you lean forward, the proximity is felt.
Okay.
And you're now getting the imaginary being blown over, but you can feel your chest responding to both vectors, not just the air being blown, but the proximity. If you did it just from an upright position, it would not have the same effectiveness.
That's right.
So you're able to, in a sense, convey to whatever senses I have available, and my body feels the compression, and I have to withdraw. But you are reaching out and bringing me back to the upright.
Right.
So you're giving, it's the cues, and again, allowing ourselves in our imaginary world, which is not much different than our real world. We're always making up stories and narratives, and we're just making the narrative up that you, in your act, you pushed me over, and now you're bringing me back up.
Right.
So for me, if I did this to you, you can feel that. And if I did that with even leaning forward, you feel it more. But
Mhm.
if I repair it, and I don't know, my hands are below the camera, that's not good. But I'm now bringing you forward gently.
Mhm,
You feel
mhm,
that too.
mhm,
So it's really the pushing back, pulling in that we're very familiar with. And in fact, the use of hands of enabling openness versus defensiveness are part of powerful signals that have been around in humanity from the very, very beginning. And I bet your dog would recognize them if you did them to yourself in his or her presence, that they would pick up the same cues.
mhm, mhm. Yes, because it's such a primal
Yeah.
expression.
Mhm.
Right.
And also remember, in
Mhm,
your exercises, you're using voice a lot.
mhm.
You think that it's the syntax of the instructions, but it's more than that. It's the intensity and the intonation of the voice. Again, your dog will pick that up as well. That if you're going to, in a sense, be a aggressor, or you're going to pull the person up, the voice will change. And the pulling up will be, welcome to my world. And I'm there to support you.
Yeah. Very nice. Let's watch another video that is we consider in the nurture dimension. It is called the weather report.
So I'm going to pretend that I have my own. It's going to be my. Oh, that's a good idea. So that way I can see your back. I'm going to pretend that this is my person who I'm going to do my weather report.
You should do it on a dog.
On a dog, yeah, if he would cooperate, but he's going to be naughty. Okay, so I'm going to use both hands, and I'm going to go like this. I know I can't use both hands, but I'm pretending I am. Today in Chicago was a windy day, so go back and forth. Heather's just going to go back and forth. Yeah, very nice. A windy day. And there were big clouds that were in the sky. That's right. Big, heavy, puffy clouds. And they were very, very heavy because inside they had sheets of rain that went down and down and down. And they kept going down to the ground. And on the ground there was little buds of flowers and little leaves of grass that were getting the water. And the water was seeping into the ground. And so then it kept raining down and raining down. And the wind kept blowing side to side and side to side. Later on, the clouds are going to part. And they're going to go up into the sides and up in a way that's beautiful, Heather. That's exactly what the clouds are going to do.
And I'm just going to skip to the end, but mostly it's the reason I kept this much on here is to show you how long this had to last in order to have the effect that I'm looking for, which is deep relaxation and just kind of a hypnotic sense.
On the moon, on the waves of Lake Michigan, like little rays of light. And that is the weather for Chicago. That was a good weather. You got good at that.
Okay.
Yeah, well, at the end, his smile is just beautiful. He's just in a beatific state. Now, having lived in Chicago, I just went back there in my mind when you went through that. And it's a pretty accurate description of weather patterns. And I started to think about springtime and rain and the storms and life. And on the weekends, we lived 8 blocks from Lake Michigan, so I would walk there and so, I was back in that rhythm of what you were doing, which was very comfortable and very, I was going to say biological, or when we talk about nature, it doesn't have to be physiological within our body. It can be within the atmosphere and the environment we walk through. And like Michigan and being in Evanston, you experienced something very similar. And I was just there where the weather report, in my mind, was not February, which is the month that you'll always remember in living in that area, but it was like April or May or even June. It was spring coming in, and feeling the power of the storms and also seeing the beauty coming from it. And it was really a wonderful cycle to experience. So it was very nice.
Oh, well, I think that not only on a personal level, since you were in Chicago and lived there, and that there is this really strong impact of the seasons for Chicagoans, but also I'm glad that the storytelling aspect, the prosodic voice, the imagery, that there was a rhythm to it, and that each phase lasted a while, so that the whole thing was rolling out, kind of makes people feel like they're in the story, and they sort of lose their sense of the of hypervigilance or what else is going on, and that's why it has to last a while for it to really take effect.
There's one other point, and that is usually, especially with children, there's hypersensitivity to the back. And really what you're showing is that there's trust. And as we experience more and more, the trust is an enabler for expanding those experiences. And that was the duration. So if you take what you did with the pull me back, or whatever they want to slide, where it slowed up this falling back, this slowed up the stimulation, tactile stimulation of the back, which is a trigger for many children to turn around or to get up and reciprocate in a not necessarily nice way.
Right. So what I'm reading into what you're saying is the rhythm and the how long every aspect lasts helps the parent to regulate the movement in accordance with it, so that it doesn't become ticklish and dysregulating. So it's kind of co-facilitated.
There's one other important point, and that is the prosodic aspect of the voice,
right?
Which is in itself an intervention unto itself. It is a calming, because that's what our nervous system wants to hear: the melodic voice, the maternal melodic voice, which says, "I'm safe, touch me. I'm not going to react." So you're layering different strategies. You're layering the intonation of voice with the gentleness of touch, with the rhythm of touch, and with the narrative. So there's multiple layers there.
Right, exactly. That's why I think this is a really powerful intervention, especially in the connection between the therapist and the parent, as they become regulated and are able to provide that.
That's a profound point. It's the therapist with the parent as well, because a parent doing that with watching a video without being in the presence of the therapist may not be as effective. And that's, so in doing that with video conferencing is a challenge, because you have to project presence. The presence of the therapist is, in a sense, the overall container of the dyad between the child and the mother.
That's exactly right. And that's the sort of the challenge or the art of doing therapy online with children and anybody, but especially dyads, where there's a dysregulated partner of the dyad, which is sometimes it's the child and sometimes it's the parent and sometimes it's both. That your presence has to be all the more resonant and containing in order to regulate it and make it a safe experience.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have one more, a real is that okay with you if we do one more? Okay. A short one that I hope we will learn something additional from.
you ready?
Yeah, yeah.
On your marks. Get set, go!
There's so many under you, you shouldn't sit like that. I got it.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, beep!
Oh, we have one. Just one? Yeah.
Oh my gosh, you champions are the winners!
Wait, maybe we should do one.
Mom and Noam are good at this game. Make yourself.
Okay, so that was just, it's a fun one. It's from Challenge, and in this case, it really is the, I had recruited another sibling because it's nice to be able to sort of team up against your mom. Especially because those two have some struggles together, the siblings, and doing something, you know, that's chaotic and a little naughty, but there's a beginning and end to it, and no one gets hurt, and the mother is certainly accommodating of it, and the children win. To bring that certain, you know, the higher arousal, positive aspects of play.
Yeah, well, it's a perfect metaphor for the shifting of aggression into play. And if we think about aggression, it recruits the same aspects of the autonomic nervous system that play does, but play is contained because there's a degree of sociality involved in play, usually voice and facial expressivity or the social referencing. And in this case, the beneficial, it was the co-regulation of the siblings together against the parent, but the parent was very receptive to the behavior. And so what could be interpreted at other times, like throwing something at a parent, was now a game. And so the actions are acted out with a different interpretation. And when you start shifting interpretations from anger and aggression to playfulness, then your work is successful.
Mm-hmm.
So what you're doing is shifting state regulation from frustration and anger to playfulness.
Right. And that is one of the major tasks of parenting, isn't it?
Well, or life. And if we think about what
Uh-huh.
is playfulness and what is humor, and both of them are often associated with violations of expectancy,
Right.
but repairs and co-regulatory behaviors. So in this case, there's no, in a sense, real violation of expectancy, except throwing something at your mom might be viewed as an unexpected behavior. But within a game model, that could occur, and the mom would not overreact. The mother wouldn't feel that she is being insulted or not respected by her children. And it becomes part of an empowerment model, which is growth. Right. It's all about, you know, self-regulation, self-empowerment is the trajectory of development.
Well, yes, so well said. I like that a lot. That they can be, you know, boisterous and even show a level of arrogance, like we beat our mom, and then for it to, you know, end peacefully, and which is a real growing edge for these kids and for families.
It's also hard for parents when their children start taking on too much control or taking on control. So there's all these paradoxes that the child's dependent, the parent doesn't like that amount of dependency, the child becomes independent, now the child's not conforming to the parent's wishes. You're watching these dialectics play out, and healthy families deal with these transitions with tremendous amount of, let's say, pride and compassion. They're very happy to see these things occur.
Wow.
I think the issue of parenting is, as it is with all relationships, not to think of them as controlling and being ownership, but see them as enabling and not empowering. So you're not controlling by saying you can do that. you're enabling the individual to be creative, to find their path, but with your support. And so some of these exercises start building that bridge of allowing the individual child to explore and to expand.
Wow. Okay, great. I really appreciate this last statement. Certainly about, it's not ownership, but facilitating this negotiation of growth, and that what these play exercises can also bring in terms of lending to that growth.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, this has certainly been a really stimulating and I feel very connected and personal
Thank you.
Conversation.
Here's a hug for you. Here.
A hug, and I do feel quite I almost leaning in. I almost feel I feel the warmth in my chest that it's been really nice to connect with you around these ideas, and to share kind of the visual of your face and voice and so on. And so I really want to thank you for sharing and giving your time.
Oh, you're quite welcome.
And look forward to continued dialogues with you.
Well, thank you, and continue the great work. It's really very effective, and it's beautiful to watch. So thank you for inviting me.
You're very, very welcome. Thank you.